another client who had things put together in a little bit more successful of a way. So this was an employment verification service that we were working with. Had a public-facing web server that was used to accept and store the applications that they were verifying. There was about 500,000 applicants' data contained inside of the databases that this web server was connected to. And again, these were job applications. They contained things like name, address, date of birth, social security number, a lot of very sensitive information that if it does get out and is exfiltrated during a cyber incident, likely needs to be reported as a data breach or at least a data exposure event. So we wanted to take this one or watch this one very closely and come to the best conclusion that we possibly could. So what happened in this case? Well, an attacker was able to exploit the web server and install what's called a web shell. And a web shell is a piece of software that can give you basically command line access to a server that's facing the public internet. It gives you pretty much 24-hour access to it. The attackers use this to gain full access to the server and were able to do a couple of tasks to do things like steal passwords, install additional backdoors, and potentially access the data that was in the connected database servers for this particular web server. So again, the questions that we always want to ask. How exactly did they get in? Do they still have access? Did they move to other servers on the network? Was there lateral movement involved? Did they gain access to the database? Was that data stolen? And again, what laws, regulations, or contracts relate? For an employment verification service that handles employment applications from pretty much every state in the United States, that becomes a really, really big question because those are 50 individual data breach laws that they may be falling under. When we got in and ran our initial investigation, we discovered a litany of logs on the network. They almost had too much log data, which is never a bad place to find yourself in during an investigation. They had Internet Information Services logs from the web server maintained for 18 months. They had flow records, network flow data maintained for 12 months. They had IDS logs maintained for 6 months. All of this was being sent to a centralized SIM. It was backed up daily. And the backups were non-writable. So even if someone did get access to them, they could not delete or otherwise alter those backups. We were able to pull all of that data back in. And that was, again, very useful and critical in our ability to come to a solid conclusion on this case. Now, I mentioned flow records on the previous slide as a great example of a piece of network information that you can pretty easily maintain on your overall network and in your monitoring and logging plan. With the flow records, what we wanted to find out was there outbound traffic going out to a malicious IP address? This comes back to the was data stolen question of the investigation. If we could identify traffic out to malicious IP addresses, there's a pretty good chance that there was some data going out the door. If we could rule that out, that puts us in a pretty good position to say that they may not have got any of the data out of the network. Web proxies are a really important part of any network architecture, and there's a lot of information we can get off these. So what we were looking for here was connection to file upload services, looking for connections out to like Dropbox or to that mega.co.nz repository. Something that would indicate to us that malicious activity was happening and that data may have gone out to a website where it wasn't supposed to go to. All right, so based on all of this data, we were able to put together an incredibly detailed timeline of events, and this was really, really helpful for the client, which we'll talk about on the next slide here. But based on our investigation, we were able to determine the adversary entered their network at 12:07 a.m. on a Monday. The activity that the adversary was able to undertake was successfully cut off at 11:25 a.m. on that same day because the alert had happened, the activity had been noticed, and the means of entry had been wiped out immediately. We were able to use those same logs to verify that no additional activity was happening. Now, we were also to identify that ProcDump was being used and a couple other Windows toolkits to do things like scrape credentials. And knowing this, we were able to advise the client to immediately push a full password reset to all users that were connected to the system to eliminate the possibility of a compromised password being used to access something else on the network. And again, we might not have known this had we not had the data available to tell us this is exactly what the attacker had done while they were in the system. So here's the key results, and this became the most important part of the investigation. What did the adversary actually get done while they were in the network for that about 12-hour period of time? Well, we were able to look at logs from the web server and determine that they had tried and failed to export database tables from the employment verification database service over 70 times. This was a really, really important finding. They had really attempted to get in there, but they had not been successfully able to pull that data back out. Whether this is from inexperience on the hacker side or some other problem they were running into, doesn't really matter. The point is we could see that they did not successfully pull data back out of it. We could also see flow records, which indicated that no large amounts of data had been exfiltrated out to a potentially malicious IP address. This was, again, a very important finding. And we also were able to identify that no lateral movement had occurred. Everything was isolated to the one web server and the one database server that the attacker had gone after. Using these, we were actually able to rule out a data breach, or at least provide a strong enough argument that the attorney on the case was able to rule out the breach in their findings. So again, this is an optimal response here. This is exactly what we want to happen, because again, we don't want to be reporting when we don't have something to actually report. If we can rule it out, we're in great shape. All right, so thank you so much, everyone. Again, my name is Matt Durrin, security consultant with LMG Security. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to ask them. You can email me at mdurrin@lmgsecurity.com, follow us on Twitter, look me up on LinkedIn, and thank you again.